Hey guys, we are getting geared up to read Fahrenheit 451. But first, we need to get a little introduction to what science fiction or sci fi means. So I have a quick little video that I'm going to play.
Know and really experience. In other words, cool stuff.
I don't know why it's doing that.
Comedy movies, but not scary ones. Well, those are two different types or genres of movie. We put other things into genres. We might split our building sets into different categories, like, say, I don't know, space, castle, city. Well, books work the same way. Most chapter books are part of a large genre called fiction. And that just means those books tell a story that came from the author's imagination. But fiction alone doesn't tell us many details about what's in the book. So we divide books up into more specific fiction genres. Harry Potter and Charlotte's Web are both fiction books, but they have very different settings and characters, so we put them into different fiction genres. Let's talk about one specific fiction genre right now. You know those books that have spaceships and robots and aliens and time travel, stuff like that? We call those kind of stories science fiction, or sci-fi for short. Science fiction, like most fiction, tells a story that came from the author's imagination, but what makes it different from other kinds of fiction? Science fiction contains unreal things that could be real in our world in the future. The unreal things in science fiction could be those amazing spaceships or robots or aliens or time machines, or any other kind of technology or discovery that just maybe, possibly could happen. A lot of imagination goes into writing science fiction and building a world of possibilities. That's why it's so fun to read. Science fiction often explores what happens when things go wrong with those tools or advancements. It's cool to build rockets and explore outer space, but what if the aliens we meet aren't so friendly? Sci-fi can help us think about the many different outcomes of our actions. Most science fiction takes place in the real world, or at least in a world with similar rules to ours. Sci-fi books have amazing, inventive things in them, but those things play by the rules of our world, of what we know and really experience. In other words, cool stuff happens because of science, not magic. If someone can turn invisible in a science fiction book, it's because they built a light-refracting hologram projection device, not just because they drank an enchanted potion. Science fiction is typically set in the future. Now, the future could be the next century or the next day, but in the imagined future, there's a technology or a scientific discovery that makes things possible that would be impossible in the present. Of course, some science fiction can be set in the present, in an alternative but familiar world. There's even subgenres of sci-fi that are set in the past, like steampunk, where advanced technologies are imagined to exist in a time before electricity. When you get into genre study, you have to remember that there's always an exception to every rule. Genres get mixed up and remixed all the time, and that makes it fun. So that's science fiction. It's full of unreal things that could be real in our world or a similar world in the near or distant future. Sci-fi author.
Okay, so that's pretty much the gist of it. I cut it off for a second, but you should be good. Okay, so talking about the author of our book, who is a sci-fi author, very famous. His name is Ray Bradbury. Okay, so as a child, he had a really fascination with monsters and magicians and things like that. So he started writing stories, and he wrote for Alfred Hitchcock. I don't know if you've heard of him. He did a lot of movies, and The Twilight Zone, which was a TV show. And he also published more than 500 literary works, like short stories and plays and novels and all sorts of stuff and poetry. Okay, so in 1940, he decided he got to sell his first story. And so in 42, he decided to quit his job and write full time. So he wrote Martian Chronicles. That's a really awesome book, too. It describes mankind's attempt to colonize Mars. And also, he just kind of has, like, science fiction usually has, like, a commentary on society. So that is no exception, the Martian Chronicles. He really just was concerned with the threat of nuclear war at the time that he was living, and also censorship, racism, conformity. He was very concerned about the dangers of technology. And these still concern us today. So, what do you think? Despite its benefits, technology can be unpredictable and the consequences of our society. So, what do you think some of the potential consequences could be? Talking now about the novel itself, Fahrenheit 451 was published in 1953, and it is a novel that is another social criticism, and it warns against the dangers of suppressing thought through censorship. Okay, to when you think of the word censorship and you think, I don't know what that means, it means to basically take away people's right to say what they want. So if they say something that you think is offensive, then you say, like, you cannot say that. Okay? Excuse me. It's kind of like the freedom of speech, if you've heard about that, talked about in like your history class or whatever. All right, so also Fahrenheit. It uses the conventions of science fiction that says that an oppressive government left unchecked can do irreparable damage to the society because it limits the creativity and freedom of its people. Now, going to the historical context, Fahrenheit was developed in the years right after World War II. So it condemns the Nazi Germany book burnings, but also in the 1950s, I don't know if you guys have gotten to this part in history, but McCarthyism, where they were looking for communists. They called it kind of like the witch hunt of the time. And there was people afraid of communism in this country. So there were people always getting accused of being communists. And that is what, the McCarthyism refers to. Um, and also, like, he kind of is a contemporary of George Orwell, which we read Animal Farm, and we just read an excerpt of 1984, so you know who Orwell is. All right, in the 50s, this is kind of like the time that he was writing these things. So 60% of the members of the middle class, they had a little more money. Okay, that's discretionary income. Okay, consumerism meant success. So that meant like if you had money to spend, then you were successful. And television had a widespread impact on American homes. This was pretty new. Like now we have a TV in all the rooms and things like that, but some, just very few people had TV, and if they did, they had one. Also, people just started having cars more and more and more. Um, and after the war, there was much more prosperity. And so a lot more people were like conforming to, like be like just like everyone else. And they were like saying things like follow the orders and of the government and you will succeed. So this is what was worrying Orwell. I mean, my bad. Bradbury. Okay, so on a personal level, Bradbury used Fahrenheit 451 as a means of protesting what he believed in. Okay, the invasiveness of the editors, people that were just like doing just very strict control of the books that they printed, and that was like keeping the people's creativity down, creativity of the writers. So if you think about it, Fahrenheit 451 is written because he wants to prevent the future, not predict it, but he does anticipate the future. So when you get to be reading and you see the things like they call seashell radios, okay, they're basically like earbuds, and the parlor walls are just giant TVs that cover every wall in their home or in that like one room, a population explosion, which is true, and we rely on technology, which we all do. What happens if the internet goes down or our phones are not charged? It's a catastrophe, right? So he was right, and he was writing this 60 years ago, and he had no idea. Okay, so what else was Bradbury right about? A rise in violence, the use of televised surveillance for many purposes. If you think about like all the things that get taped, Like you go into a store, you get taped. You walk down the street, you get taped. You might have like people in your neighborhood that have a Ring camera. You might have one. Okay, growing illiteracy, meaning like people cannot read or write because they're texting all the time. They don't have to read. Um, so like things need to be quick, 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 like little sound bites, and that is the truth. Those are things that we will encounter in the book. So there are going to be some themes that we talk about. The first one is like the rise in technology and technology replacing people. Technology is highly advanced in the book. And like I said, TV, radio broadcasts, fast cars, atomic weapons, these all dominate the people's experiences. And they like things like nature, music, and poetry, those things suffer. Second one is censorship. Okay, so you remove or withhold information from the public by controlling a group or body. So you basically keep information from them and you do not let them share those types of information with the public. Typically, this is done by government, but also can be like by a religious or a secular group or a corporation. Third one, this is a continuation of censorship, excuse me. So in the book, basically books are burned because people are sad and discontented when, like something offends them in the book. So they start taking the books away and they begin burning them. Um, so that's an interesting little tidbit about the book coming up. Third theme, rise in selfishness and the lack of human interaction. So technology is very advanced in the book, and people just care about themselves and their immediate surroundings, and they do not care about their fellow man. And they're just like lacking in human interaction, just basically being on their phones or on those type of things. And that is actually happening now. Government control and dystopia. So the dystopia motif, like it's something that's very popular in science fiction. Basically, it's a futuristic society that is run by a totalitarian government. So we talked about totalitarian government when we read Animal Farm, and it's basically like a dictatorship. So the individual rights are just non-existent. And that is central to this novel as well. Okay, so I just have a little thing there, like dystopian, everything's unpleasant, and it's very, like, the environment's bad. So here's some more information about dystopia. Propaganda is used to control citizens. The information and thought are restricted. There is one figurehead that's worshipped by citizens. Citizens are constantly surveilled, watched. Okay, they feel trapped and they struggle to escape. The natural world is banished and distrusted. Citizens are dehumanized. They have corporate and economic things. There are large corporations control society through their advertising and products. Political things, red tape, a lot of regulations, and government officials are incompetent. Technological society is controlled by technology like robots and computers. And philosophical and religious ideology is enforced through a dictatorship or a theocratic government. Okay, so these are the dystopian type of governments. Okay, so that's some information about that. Lastly, we have knowledge is power. Um, think about these questions. What does true happiness consist of? Is it make you happier to not know things? Or does it basically learning provide you true happiness? So in the world of the novel, the firemen promote ignorance by destroying their books with fire. And with them goes the knowledge. All right, so this comes with a warning. Sometimes writers write about a world that doesn't exist yet, but they need to illuminate a path that they hope humanity does not take. So we need to be encouraged to examine our actions and take the warnings of the possible consequences. This book is such a warning. It's very hard to believe it was written 68 years ago because the things he talked about, it's like he was a time traveler. Okay, lessons we will learn. So while we read Fahrenheit, think of the lessons that Bradbury is trying to teach us and what should we do to avoid this terrible future. All right, so that is the end of our intro, and so go ahead and get all the questions answered, turn this Ed puzzle in, and you will be good to begin reading on Monday.